it's Jess and today it's World Book Day, and because you usually get to see my face chatting about all things book related, today I thought I would do something a little bit different. So I have invited a whole bunch of vloggers to just share very quickly about their favourite books from childhood. So grab a cuppa, get comfortable, and I hope that you enjoy watching.
So when I was a child, I used to absolutely love reading. I used to love reading books from people like Roald Dahl and Terry Pratchett, but I think my absolute favourite was definitely Enid Blyton. And my favourite book of all time is the Enid Blyton Magic Faraway Tree series. This book here is a book of three, which comprises of all three books, which is The Enchanted Wood, The Magic Faraway Tree and The Folk of the Faraway Tree. Which basically centre on a group of children who find a magical tree in the woods next to their house. And it just takes you on an adventure with them as they discover what is in the tree. It's probably one of the first books that really captured my imagination in such a way, because every time you read it there's new characters and there's a new land to explore, and it was just quite an exciting book to read as a child because you never knew what you were going to expect. It was always very exciting to read and see exactly where they were going to end up that day, what land was going to be at the top of the tree, and if they were going to get back down the tree in time before the world moved. So yeah, it really captured my imagination and I just absolutely loved it. I did pick up this one here, which is all three of them, from a shop a couple of years ago, and I hope that one day my kids are going to enjoy it as much as I did, because it is just a fantastic book.
My favourite childhood book is The 101 Dalmatians by Dodie Smith. I have my original copy upstairs. This copy was given to me at my wedding 13 years ago by my mum, and she gave a speech about how much this book had meant to me as a child. Namely that I once lent it to this girl called Claire, and she bent the front cover. Genuinely never forgave her. Possibly would still have a problem with it even now. That book meant so much to me at the time. I love the story, I love the sense of adventure. There's the wickedness, there's the good, there's the idea that dogs have this society where they bark and pass messages across counties, and you know, just this incredible sense of community amongst the dogs. And I really loved that, and I really kind of bought into all of that, and there's just, it's just a really kind of enthralling read. There's always something happening, there's always some drama. It's a very good book.
This is a story about a little bear, and as you can see on here, he has found a cardboard box, he's put a colander on his head, and he is flying to the moon. He stops off on the moon and has a little picnic with his owl friend, and it's just so charming, isn't it? The thought of sitting on the moon and having a picnic and looking back at the world. And then the book ends with baby bear realising his bath must be ready, so he flies back to Earth, says goodbye to his owl friend, and goes for a bath with mummy bear, who obviously does not believe that he has been on this adventure and thinks that he has just been playing in the chimney, and that's why he is covered in soot and mess, as you can see there. You can all relate to finding a box and pretending it's a car or a spaceship or whatever it is. And I remember as a kid spending absolutely hours inside my mum's washing basket pretending that I was doing the same as this little bear and flying to the moon, and I would shove a colander on my head and sit on the kitchen floor and pretend to drive my spaceship. So I think that when I think of my childhood, this book always springs to mind, and still to this day I really love reading this to my son. It brings back so many memories. It's just amazing how a book can do that.
My book that was very special to me as a child was The Baby Unicorn by Jean and Claudio Marzolo. Alright, so I was completely obsessed with this book. It's about a baby unicorn
who grows into a full-blown unicorn in order to fight the dragons and bring peace to the unicorns and the dragons who are warring. When I was little, I think the biggest thing with me was like illustrations, which is probably true of a lot of people now that I think about it, because, you know, you can't read. But there are always pictures that I specifically remember from different books that, like, the ones that I remember as my favorites, there's always at least one picture that really stands out to me that I remember loving. And this whole book I love. Like, I remember this whole thing. This was the first book that I could read. I definitely could not read it, but I pretended that I had memorized all the words because I knew like when the pages would turn. And so I was like, Mom, I can read. And I like went through, and I previously thought that I had actually fully memorized the book and like, you know, recited it to her word for word. But now looking at it, that's completely impossible because most of the pages look like this. And that would be a lot of words for me to remember word for word. This is Star, the baby unicorn, and her mom. And this is the house that is Star's mother. So this is called the house spell, and the mom becomes a house that the baby unicorn can be inside to be safe. And it talked about the time when the dragons and unicorns used to be friends, but the dragons got jealous that the unicorns had magic. So they started to war with the unicorns, and they stole their horns. And you can see down here, this little dragon guy, he's got a unicorn horn. But Star's father found this spell called the 8-horn friendship spell, and it changes enemies into friends, but they obviously need 8 full-grown unicorns. But they need Star's horn to be full-grown before they can make this spell happen. Star is brave, so she gets a little bit of horn, and she breaks out of the house. Because, you know, ripping out of your mom, that's not weird at all. She gets to the cave with the other unicorns, and there's her dad, but her horn is not completely grown, so they can't cast the spell. So the dragons start to come into the cave to attack them, and Star tells them to stop. And that is her final brave act. And now her horn is full grown. Look at that! They can do the spell! And from that day on, dragons and unicorns were friends, and Star made friends with a little dragon named Moon, because he has a moon on his forehead, just like she has a star. I know that it's such a great story. I even have a kitty. She came up to listen to story time. Bye!
This book is written by the great-granddaughter of a gentleman named Harry Colborne. Harry grew up in Winnipeg, Canada, and he enlisted with his fellow Canadians to fight in World War I. So while traveling across Canada in a train with his fellow soldiers, they stopped at a train station where a little black bear was. Harry decided to purchase the bear from the gentleman, and he brought this little black bear, named him Winnie, after his hometown of Winnipeg. And Winnie traveled across Canada in a train. Then he got on a boat and came to England. He stayed with the troops in England. He was kind of their mascot. But Harry and his fellow soldiers were going to be shipping off or heading over to France to fight in World War I. So Harry donated him to the London Zoo, where he lived and grew bigger, and along came a little boy named Christopher Robin. Now Christopher Robin is the son of Alan Alexander Milne, the writer of the stories Winnie the Pooh. So Robin got to actually go into the Winnie's enclosure at the zoo. He got to play with him, he got to meet him. This little black bear was the inspiration for Winnie the Pooh, the stories of Winnie the Pooh. This book is beautifully illustrated. It tells the story of Winnie and then of Christopher Robin coming and meeting him. Back of the book, there's some lovely photos of Winnie. There's Winnie and Harry. If you go to London Zoo, you can see this statue. Me and my family have seen that. And then there's also a picture of Winnie with Christopher Robin. So that is one of our family's favorite new children's book. My little girl is going to be Winnie for World's Book Day this year. So I hope you enjoyed it. Do check this out. It's probably a book that you maybe not have come across, but it's a beautiful book about a real life story of a little black bear.
I wasn't actually a very big reader when I was younger. I didn't really start discovering reading until I was into my teens, and then I became a very, very avid reader, and I still read a lot now. But since having my little man, I have discovered books that I actually did enjoy when I was younger that I'm now able to enjoy again with Elian. And this is one of mine and his favourite books at the moment. Ta-da! So, I had this book when I was younger. I'm pretty sure my grandma had it at her house and she used to read this one to me. So this is Peace at Last by Jill Murphy, and it's the story of Daddy Bear who can't get to sleep because first of all Mommy Bear is snoring, and then Baby Bear's awake, and it doesn't matter what room he goes to, there's noises that keep him awake. As an insomniac, I know what it's like when you can't sleep. But I really enjoy reading this to my little man now because it's got different noises going through it. So I make the noises and he really, really loves it. So it's been around for a long time, considering it was first published in the 1980s. And then I picked this book up for him at Christmas time because I did recognise the story from it. It's got some really nice illustrations as well. So they're not too bright and colourful. Ooh. But they are really beautiful illustrations. So that is my favourite children's book.
My favourite ever book is The Borrowers. As you can see, my copy is it's pretty worn out. I got bought this when I was 4 years old by my dad, and it was one of the first chapter books that I ever read, and me and my dad actually read it together. So it's got very good memories for me, and I will be getting a new copy for my little girl. There are loads of reasons why The Borrowers is one of my favourite books, and there's a whole series of the books as well. There's a few different ones. I think growing up as a child I was really small. I mean, I'm still quite small in height anyway. And so for me, Arrietty was this kind of, she was tiny, you know, she was one of the little people, but she was still this fierce and independent and adventurous girl. And I think that I really looked up to her as a child. I also had a really vivid imagination. I loved the idea that there were these whole you know, communities of little people living under the floorboards. At one point we lived in a really old house, and I loved leaving little bits and pieces around to see if they would be taken by the borrowers, and every now and then they would actually go missing. It was probably just my mum clearing up, wondering why I'd left like a million hobby pins down on the floor, but at the time I thought it was amazing. I was convinced that we had borrowers in our house. I just love how adventurous they are. Not necessarily willingly. Arrietty is very adventurous, very curious, and she wants to go out and explore the world. But her parents are, you know, they understand the dangers of the human world, you know, the human beings as they call us, and they understand the dangers of the big wide world. But you know, they're forced to leave their home, and it's, I think one of the first times I read this when I was by myself I was about 8. And we were just moving, and I very much sympathised with the idea that they're being forced to leave their home and having to move to a completely new area. I was having to move schools and things like that, so it was a real nice constant for me reading it, and it was like, you know, they've gone through all this already, and they end up fine as well. So I'll be fine too. The characters are so detailed and in-depth and so realistic. You know, the dad pod, he's, you know, very traditional, and he, you know, he's got that kind of women should stay at home and look after the house, and it's up to the guys to go out and find the things for the rest to eat and provide. And he's living in a really changing world because they only have a daughter, they don't have a son. So he's coming to terms with the idea that actually one day Arrietty is going to be the one who has to provide for her family. And I think that's something that stuck with me as well, because, you know, getting older, I was always the one that wanted to go out and work, and I always have been a worker, and you know, very curious. And I think a lot of that is actually to do with this book, which might seem strange, but when you read something a million times at a really young age, it obviously influences your decisions later on in life. Now I feel really guilty about the state of this book. I will be getting another copy, but I can't bear to let go of this one.
One of my favourite childhood stories was Ginger's Adventures. My mum used to read this to me over and over when I was little, and there was parts that we used to laugh at and parts that were a bit sad. But I remember this so much, and in fact we read it that much that it's actually quite battered in places. This is my original copy. So this story is about a little dog that lives on a farm with his best friend Tommy, and then one day he gets sent to London and he's really unhappy. The family that have him are really unkind to him, or it feels like they're unkind to him. He chews a toy by accident and he gets into trouble and he's really miserable. So he runs away from the family in London and heads back to Tommy and his home on the farm, and Tommy is so happy to see him. And it's a lovely little ending. As a child, it used to make me cry a little bit because it was so sad when he wasn't treated nicely in London. But of course, there was the happy endings. And I remember this book so fondly, my mum reading it to me when I was little. And it's something that I'm going to pass on to my children and read to them as they get a little bit bigger.
My favourite book was The Secret Staircase, and it was part of the Bramley Hedge collection. I don't have it anymore, but here is a picture of it on Amazon. I really need to get myself a little copy. I loved it. It is about a little mouse who finds a secret staircase in this giant tree, and the illustrations are beautiful, and it really awoken my imagination about what could be behind doors or bookcases or curtains, and made me just want to go and explore the world. It finds that the mouse finds this beautiful bathroom, it's huge, and hidden bedrooms and like old ballrooms and loads of dressing up clothes. It's such a lovely little story. It is my favourite one. I can't wait until the girls are old enough for me to be able to read it to them. Should probably get a copy first, shouldn't I? But it's lovely. I highly recommend it for all children. It's just a really sweet book, as are the rest of the Bramley Hedge series. They were lovely. I can't remember what the author is called. Jill Barklam. Thank you, Jill. You made me a very happy little girl.
So a huge thank you to all the vloggers who contributed a video and took part. I will link to all of their channels in the description box down below. Do go and check them out, because you never know, you may find a new vlogger and a new channel that you want to subscribe to. Don't forget to give me the thumbs up and subscribe here, and I will see you all soon.